we go to our next on-stage conversation. And please welcome the host of our next conversation on stage. Katie Manderfield is a leading digital strategist and editor who loves big ideas, future trends, and the written word. She's the director of content strategy at the New York Times T-Brand Studio, where you're heading up the story mining engagements and custom creative work for brand. And she will discuss the future of advertisement with Gansca, which I'll let you introduce in a second. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming to Cluj again. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be... Whoa. Is that my hair? That's probably my hair. Sorry about that. I'm very happy to be back here. I like to joke, the last time I was here, I was saying that this is actually the stage where I first had my first dance performance when I was 6 years old. So it's really good to be back. I think that's you. That is you. Okay, let's see. Okay, if it happens again, maybe we switch to the other mics. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Anda. A few years ago, I started a company called Knotch. It's a company that helps really large brands understand if their digital marketing is working and how to make it work better. I wasn't initially going to enter the advertising space at all, but as you all know, startups have to pivot their way to success. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, we decided to move our entire company from Silicon Valley to New York, and then also enter the advertising industry because we recognized the potential of our technology to help these really large brands. And that's roughly when I met Katie, who is, in this land of advertising, is probably one of the most brilliant minds that I've met. She's brilliant not just because she's an incredible creative and she has a background as a writer, but also brilliant because she manages to take that creativity and help brands find their voice and find the stories that are relevant for them to tell. And so your introduction and your bio is very complicated, and so I thought maybe as opposed to telling everyone again what your title is, maybe you can just share a little bit about what you actually do.
Yes, of course. And I'm so grateful to be here. This is my first time in any part of Eastern Europe, and so I'm glad that Cluj is kind of my first experience here.
It's a good experience.
Yeah,
it's a good immersion.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So yes, as the director of content strategy at T-Brand Studio, I really help brands figure out the best stories that they can tell, and we'll get into that in a moment, what that means, and also, increasingly that means helping brands tell their story on their owned and operated channels. And so I really head up a team that goes in and, finds stories for these brands as a journalist would, and then we help tell those stories to the world.
Thank you. Okay, so before we dive into the really complicated buzzwords, because our industry has a lot of buzzwords, and I want to make sure that we're kind of taking a step back and just going through the evolution of what's been happening in the last few years, especially, well, in the last kind of decades, right? And so currently advertising, I think, is one of the largest industries in general. It's almost $600 billion. And advertising, people think of advertising as those really disruptive banner ads, but if you think about it, advertising really pays for us to use the internet. And as consumers, we are constantly engaged with all the brands that we love and some brands that maybe we don't love in all these different ways. But the really interesting thing about advertising is that as consumers are changing the ways in which they're engaging with content and they're changing the platforms and the devices that they're engaging on, advertising also has to change. So we've been looking at this industry for the past few years and seeing some really, really massive disruptions. And I think the disruption can be kind of boiled down to a couple of big things. The first one is a disruption of the creative format, and Katie's going to talk a little bit more about that and what that means. But basically, we initially had TV advertising and banner ads and billboards and paper ads. And then when the internet came along, we started having all these pop-ups, the really annoying things that we try to X out as fast as we can, and about 0.01% of people actually clicked on them. And then as time went on, I think brands started recognizing the importance of creating an actual interaction, a valuable interaction with the customer. And so that evolution has really been interesting to watch, and Katie's a massive part of that. The second disruption, I think, is around the distribution of advertising. And so the really interesting stats that we were going through before our chat today is really around the duopoly, as they're called, which is Facebook and Google. And so I'm going to make sure I don't want to botch this, but basically Facebook in 2012 had about 5% of the global digital advertising spend. And in 2018, Facebook in the US alone is going to have 56.8% of the digital advertising spend. And the other really interesting stat is that Facebook and Google together account for 83% of digital advertising growth, which is up from 63% in the second quarter of 2015. So the message is really loud and clear. It's very hard for the traditional premium channels to still take some of that advertising, digital advertising dollars. So I'm going to throw kind of the first question back to you. We were actually discussing a little bit about how everyone's saying Facebook and Google are going to take over, control everything. But for the first time this year, it actually seems like there will be a decline in the share of US digital advertising, according to a new eMarketer prediction. So if that's not the future, if it's not just Facebook and Google, then what do you think is the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think...
Thank you, we came up with it together. So.
Yes. But I think that's a question that everyone in this space is asking themselves right now. Brand marketers are sort of trying to figure out exactly what their customers are interested in, where consumers are, how to reach them. Google and Facebook have notoriously, been easy these last couple of years to kind of have hyper-targeted consumers to really figure out who your audiences are. And I think what we're finding is that, data isn't always specifically the answer to a lot of the problems. So, if you think of sort of Mad Men era advertising where you had huge agencies who would, put a lot of their time and effort into the creative, as data has really sort of exploded across the market, I think people, understandably, were like, we can reach our audiences in new ways than ever before. And so now I think we're actually seeing that data can't do everything either, just like creative couldn't do everything. And I think there's a huge opportunity for data and creativity to sort of join
come together,
to come together, to unite, and to create experiences that target the right people, but also that create meaning and have, that unforgettable experience that when you see something creative, you just love and you don't know why, because it's emotional, it's amazing, it's artistic. And so that's where I think, personally, the future is going, but also I think that's why it's not necessarily all creative or all data, and we're seeing a bit more of a united front on that.
Marriage between the two. Yeah, that makes sense. And so talk to us a little bit about how content came along and why do you think it happened and kind of what it means as compared to the traditional display advertising.
Yeah, so the first question I'm always asked when I explain my job is, are you a writer at the New York Times? And I actually sit on the business side. So I sit in advertising and I basically help create revenue for the Times. And we do that by investing in content. So we create content and creative experiences that feel native to the New York Times. So
but they're sponsored by a brand.
Correct. They are sponsored by a brand. We are paid for, by advertising dollars. And we do this because, the old models weren't working, because people who come to the New York Times want to read a story that is of a certain type of quality, of caliber, and of interest. So context has become sort of the new, really important aspect in advertising. And that's, for us, kind of how we were born. So we actually have a mirror kind of newsroom that's just focused on, branded content and creating these experiences that talk more about ideas than necessarily maybe about products, which is sort of what people mostly expect from advertising. And so I think this new era of trying to reach people through context and to be contextually relevant is where brands need to be. So we're seeing, a move away from sort of traditional banner ads to really having brands come up with amazing experiences, really awesome storytelling, and sort of top-of-the-line content that you might expect to find in editorial publications. So you're seeing a lot of these native ad studios pop up and evolve basically what they're doing. And I think that is something that, as we think about, going from art to science and then to having this art and science approach of creativity and data, is a question I actually had for you also.
Oh my God, you have a question for me?
Which is, as brands, start to think about being more contextual, creating these awesome creative and emotional experiences, where does the data piece fit in there?
Thank you, great question. So I, as I mentioned, was a completely new entrant to the advertising world 2.5 years ago. And the first switch that I really saw was a switch away from traditional banner ads and into content, as Katie was mentioning. And it was really interesting from a data nerd standpoint, because if you think about it, display ads are pretty easy to measure. So they've either been viewed or not, or clicked on or not. But when it comes to a longer form of advertising, like a video or an article, what does success mean, right? Like, it's not just about a click. It's not just about the views. It's not just about social. It's not just about the engagement, how much time someone spent. It's actually a combination between that and then maybe, did this content piece actually move someone emotionally? And did it lead to an actual conversion, which is the ROI, you know, the kind of eternal term that every marketer is chasing, right? And so when we built our platform, initially it was just in mind with the consumer. We wanted to give consumers a voice. We wanted them to feel like they were able to share how they felt about something and to have their voice be heard. But as time went by, we realized that the only way you can really kind of get to the truth about a human is when you start intersecting what they say about themselves with what their behavior says about them. So we took this technology that we built to brands, and we said, look, you have this new form of advertising content, which is debatable if it's new or not, but, you know, new form of investment. It's growing really fast. Content marketing, just for context, is growing at 16% year on year, as compared to just traditional display advertising, which is growing at 4%. And we said, hey, like, wouldn't you want to use our technology to be able to measure all these different things all at once? And so we were able to see the first shift, which is, yes, they, you know, as they're investing more and more in content, they actually want to find ways to measure it and justify it and optimize it. So we became the platform for that. And the second shift, which is actually why Katie's job is so cool and kind of the movement that she stands for, is we've seen brands move actually away from just doing simple deals with publishers or simple deals with Facebook and into creating their own content. So what this means is if you're a brand out there and your product is, let's say, I don't know, 3D printers, like HP Inc., right, who's one of your customers. You want to be able to kind of own the story and start telling stories about the innovation that you're making yourself, as opposed to giving the story to someone else. And the reason why this is important is because when you get to tell your own story on your own property, you actually get to see most about your audience, because the audience comes to your property, which then gives you the ability to collect all the feedback data immediately, as opposed to when you're spending money with Facebook, right, when you basically have to allow Facebook to collect that data about their audience and then maybe send it back to you, maybe not. And so the visibility is just very different.
And I think we're seeing a return to brands really owning their customers. And I think that kind of feeds into that narrative as well. And I think marketers are seeing that content works. There's some stats here too. 53% of marketers say blog content creation is their top inbound marketing priority. And 9%, it might be 47, sorry, my handwriting, of buyers viewed 3 to 5 pieces of content before engaging with the sales rep. So people are looking, they're researching, they want to know about the content. And brands are increasingly looking, you know, to publishers, to partners, to figure out how this content can actually live and breathe on their own channels. So at T-Brand Studio, we've actually, you know, once we built up this native advertising unit, we're finding that the market and brands are now asking us to act more as consulting partners, to say, hey, you know what's contextually relevant on the times. What's contextually relevant for us? What are the, you know, conversations we should be leading? And so we actually now have, like, you know, other people in the space as well, but we have sort of a consulting arm that works with brands to really identify sort of their differentiation in the market, to figure out kind of what their, you know, creative and conversational edge is, and really owning a conversation that they can sustain with consumers for the long term, so that people come to their channels, they know who they are, they know what they're talking about, and that there's a real value exchange. So, you know, companies now need to talk about sort of the expertise that they have to gain trust and loyalty from their consumers. And I think, you know, hand in hand, kind of having this creative and really having a really thought-leading conversation and then getting to know your customers really well is sort of, I think that is where the future is headed.
Totally. The other interesting bit about what you're up to is that you're also giving brands the power to completely own and then also simplify what digital marketing means for them.
Right.
Because usually if you have a digital marketing campaign, you then have an agency that needs to plan like 50 different places it needs to show up in. Imagine like Facebook and Twitter, like there's all these new channels where consumers are and you have to kind of go find them. Mm-hmm. I think the strategy around owned content is a lot more about trying to figure out how to get people to come to you and deliver value for them, which is a little bit simpler in an ever-changing landscape. And in particular, like if you don't know about this, you should probably find out more about this. But one of the reasons why Facebook and Google have been having a lot of issues is because of the point you were making, which is that data and science is not the full answer. Facebook had issues about misreporting their video metrics to advertisers, so they were overinflating their video metrics. Google, YouTube in particular, has had issues with brand safety, which basically means that advertising on YouTube was showing up next to really inappropriate videos. And it's because the only thing that was powering it was an algorithm. So now both of these big technology companies are literally throwing people at the problem. Like they're hiring like crazy. I'm sure they've reached out to you. But basically they're just trying to figure out how do we kind of back into a world that that's not just using algorithms at data, but also is bringing the human into it. Yeah. But as brands look at this, they're thinking, oh, we actually need to simplify it ourselves and try to own the conversation much more.
And I think that plays into a lot of conversations that have been happening here too, around sort of AI and tech, but also making sure that there's that sort of human connection or human layer too, that's sort of able to say, like this doesn't make sense because there's no necessarily emotional connection. Is this really resonating with consumers in a way, that feels magical, which I think too, is at the heart of marketing and advertising in the first place. So
totally.
Yeah.
And even us as a data company, coming from Silicon Valley, when we first came into the industry, we were all high and mighty about the power of data. But the truth is, the only thing that we can hope to do is to empower someone like you with the right insights to then make the creative decisions and make the distribution decisions that are appropriate for the brand.
Yeah,
but
just if no one sees it, then it's
yeah, exactly.
It's pretty pointless.
Yeah, just kind of it on itself is difficult.
Right.
So we have a couple of more minutes left. So I wanted to just get your thoughts on the evolution of the agency model a little bit and how it kind of started from the Mad Men era and where it is today, and where you think the future of that is headed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's also...
And maybe let's actually explain the role of the agency first.
Yeah, so I think the role of the agency has evolved. I think we moved from a model that was agency of record, so having agencies for multi-years and handling huge accounts, sometimes for decades. And I think that model we're seeing that kind of taper off a bit. And I think it's because there's so many exciting opportunities for brands to work with specialized shops, to work with different vendors and to come up with truly sort of unique experiences. And so I think it's, while a lot of people have said sort of the death of the agency or crisis when it comes to the agency, I think it's really an exciting opportunity for people to sort of reevaluate, what everyone's specialty is. And it's a really exciting opportunity, I think, for marketers today to be able to kind of pick and pull from the people that they think are delivering great experiences. So we're seeing a lot more now, as I mentioned before, of sort of consulting, of strategy, really leading a lot of the creative ideas to make sure that that the ideas are awesome, but they're the right idea as well. So making sure that the objectives make sense and all kind of ladder up versus sort of just throwing a really awesome creative idea out there. So I think, to me, I've just, we're also seeing traditional consulting agencies get into this marketing game too. You have Deloitte, Accenture, and that's also exciting because they have a ton of great sort of tools there that can help the marketer. I think, again, it's just sort of figuring out what everyone's specialty is and making sure that together it actually reaches the consumer and excites them in a way that hasn't before. And I think strategy has become very sort of necessary to that, and I think we're seeing kind of more investments from brands there to make sure that all of the ideas and the different partners that they're working with make sense.
What's been most fascinating to me is to see how in kind of the Mad Men era, when advertising initially happened, there was this specialization on just finding the best creative. So you'd go to an agency to just come up with the idea for your brand. And then as time went by, these creative agencies were like, oh, actually now we can start also controlling the spend on TV and print and so on. And then they said, oh, now it's technology and the internet. We can actually start controlling the data and the technology. And then they all started adding up so many things that they became pretty commoditized and hard to compete with each other. Then now they're kind of entering again the realm of less specialized. Like, we are the best at creative, we are the best at distribution. So it's interesting to see how history evolves. And the final thing that I'll say that I think is important is Marketing has become such an interesting space for not just Accenture and Deloitte, but also for Salesforce and Oracle and Adobe and IBM and Microsoft. They're all building so much technology to try to enter the space because there's tremendous amount of spend in it. So it's a really kind of cool time to be alive in the advertising industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much, potential out there to really marry all of these different tools and creative ideas. I think we're going to see, while it's been, I think, a challenging industry in the last couple of years, I think what's going to happen is amazing. So
Yep.
I'm excited.
Cool. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for coming
you.
to Transylvania, to
Yes, and
Texylvania.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, and I hope you'll come back many, many times in the future.
Thank you for
to visit us
moderating.
again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.